Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I am so excited to be here. I have absolutely no chill about this upcoming panel, which is about the cleaner future of motorsports. I would say the appeal of motorsports has never been greater in the world, and it's time to talk about how to make it more sustainable so future generations can enjoy the sport that we all love. And to help me talk about this, I'd like to welcome to the stage Formula E CEO Jeff Dodds and Haas F1 driver Kevin Magnussen. Come on up, guys. All right, I'm going to sit here. I will sit here, I think. Yeah. Over here. So I think let's start with a table setting here, because we like to think that maybe F1 and Formula E might be on two opposite sides of the spectrum, but it seems like they're kind of moving closer and closer together. So, Kevin, I'm actually going to start with you. How do you think F1 has evolved in your 10 years as an F1 driver?
It's evolved massively. I mean, the technology that was in Formula One when I sort of started in 2010, around that time, you know, that they were big V8 engines, just naturally aspirated, you know, wasting fuel basically unlimited.
Yeah.
You know, wasting tires unlimited. Just, no boundaries in terms of the resources that were used in Formula One. The budgets were unlimited, so all the development and everything was unrestricted. Whereas today it's hybrid engines. We've got, you know, we've actually got more horsepower than we did when I started with these engines. Back then we got more horsepower now, but with a engine, a combustion engine that's about a third of the size that it was back then. So technology has evolved a lot, and it comes in phases. F1, or the FIA, the governing body, it introduces new regulations. So, you know, every sort of fourth or fifth year, and every time these come around, you know, it's very clear that it's you know, very focused on getting more green, more sustainable. Yeah. The technology that we get in our hands, you know, it's a set of regulations that we have to try and work with, and you know, we don't ask for these things, but it's clear that the direction that FIA and Formula One are going is trying to be relevant to the industry. Yeah. And I think, you know, today the sustainability is the best way to be relevant to the industry. Back in, you know, in the time I talked when I started, you know, it was very clear that it was safety. Mm-hmm. I think many of the systems that you have in your road car, whether it be ABS or traction control, ESP, all those safety systems actually came from Formula One. They were systems that weren't necessarily developed because of safety, because of making the drivers more safe, because it was a faster way of going racing. If the ABS or the traction control was sufficient, then we went faster. And that technology went into road cars and have saved millions of lives over the years. So it's very clear that the direction F1 is taking at the moment.
Yeah. So Jeff, and Formula E has been bred to be sustainable. And you're leading the way on sustainability efforts. Can you talk a little bit about Formula E's history?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. So actually, Formula E is only 10 years old. So Kevin has been racing in Formula One for longer than Formula E has existed.
I was going to say,
which is quite staggering. And it was formed with three ambitions. Yeah. One of those was to create an elite world championship for motor racing. And I'll talk a little bit later, I suspect, about the technology and how that's involved. But when it was created, there were only 300,000 electric vehicles sold in the world that year. So the technology didn't really exist. The second thing it was created for was to be a laboratory for the manufacturers to develop and showcase electric vehicle technology. So we talk about the racetrack being the laboratory for those manufacturers. And the third pillar was sustainability. So Formula One's 75 years old, I think, something like that. We were just chatting off stage. 75 years old, they're becoming more sustainable, but they're having to re-engineer a business that's 75 years old. We, from day one, set out to be net zero. So we've been net zero from day zero, and our business is engineered to work that way.
Yeah. Can I ask, what innovations are you most excited about in Formula E?
So Formula, if you go back to the first generation of car, we're on our third generation of car. The first car was not very good. So it had a top speed of about 140 miles an hour. It took about 3 seconds to get to 100 kilometers an hour. And the battery lasted for half of the race.
Yeah.
So you had two cars. It was like a triathlon. The driver would jump out the car halfway through, jump into a second car. So the car that's on the track this year will go 200 miles an hour, gets to 100 kilometers in about 1.8 seconds, and the battery lasts for the whole race. So that's happened in just 3 generations of car. I think if I had to pick one piece of technology that excites me most, it will be the evolution of the actual battery. So we operate today on a lithium-ion accumulator, and the likelihood is in the next 2 to 3 years we'll move into solid-state batteries. And what that allows us is more energy density, so it will last for longer in a much smaller unit, so taking weight out of the car, thereby producing faster, better-performing cars.
Kevin, there's been so many changes in F1 as well. As a driver, how have you adapted to some of these changes?
Well, as I said, every time FIA brings a new set of regulations for us, it becomes more and more restrictive. So you have less tools to work with. Effectively. They shrink the envelope of your design scope, and the big one for us was when Formula One in 2014 went from naturally aspirated to hybrid engines. Suddenly, you went from, as I said, completely flat out, just wasting energy throughout the whole race, to having to manage and strategize your race. If you just go flat out with the engines, you last 2 laps and you run out and you have to stop. So, we're trying to harvest and spend energy in the most efficient way as possible, while going as quick as possible and gaining an advantage on your competitors. And this is just driving efficiency in the cars, and I think that a lot of this development and work going into winning a race, is you have to be the most efficient you can with your energy. And of course, Formula E, they're fully electric. I think the drivers have to do a lot of that work manually with their feet and hands, and have to save their way through the race in the most efficient way, whereas us, we're more, this is in the background. Our engine is a very, yours is a complex one, but ours is, it's got a naturally aspirated V6 engine, a very small one, but then you've got a turbo, which is both harvesting energy and spending, and you've got the battery, which is, so you've got a lot of components there that has to be, as efficient as possible. So it's moved on a lot. Now at the point we are here, we can, as a driver, you don't feel that you have to save. It's all automated, and a lot of resource goes into the software and all the efficiency of these systems. So, but then we suddenly get a new set of tires, which is FSC certified. So chemicals in the tires that we used to have, which made the tires very, very good, suddenly gone, and we have to make that work. So suddenly you restrict us a lot by giving us tires that traditionally would look very, very bad, and we have to just make it work. And
you
I think
have to get used to it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
What we see every time is that there is a huge scope of potential to improve with these things. You get stuff where you think this isn't going to work. We can't be saving here and there, and we can't be managing these tires. But eventually, it's always fascinating to see how far we can get with these things.
Just to pick up on that, there's 2 things Kevin said there, which I think illustrates where some of the differences are in the sports, because they look similar. World-class racing drivers, single-seater racing cars, 4 wheels, so it might look similar. So our car will start the race with only 50% of the energy it needs to finish the race. So the other half of the energy it needs is generated in the race through regeneration of the battery. So when Kevin talks about sophisticated systems in the background, our drivers are tactically having to work out the best place in the race to take their foot off of the, I was going to say gas, which would be the wrong term, their foot off the pedal to allow the energy to regenerate into the battery, which I think is interesting. And then tyres, you talked about tyre development. Tyres make a massive difference to the performance of a car in terms of speed. Our cars race on road tyres. They don't race on racing tyres. And the reason they don't, when I said at the start, we had 3 pillars, and one of them was about letting manufacturers develop things on the track to put in their road cars. Well, if you put a slick tyre or a racing tyre on our car, they learn nothing about their road tyres.
Wow.
So we actually let our drivers and our cars race on road tyres.
Wow. If anybody has watched an F1 race, tyre management is huge. Like the pit stops, they make or break a race. So it's a huge, huge difference. Some of the most exciting parts about F1 races are the pit stops, unfortunately.
And crashes.
And crashes. So actually, can I pull on this thread a little bit? We talked about the differences between Formula E, Formula One. Like you said, on the outside, it might look like a similar racing product, but it's actually very different. One of the criticisms about Formula E, or maybe one of the things that's been discussed, is can the racing product of Formula E reach F1 in terms of competitiveness?
I assume you're asking me, not Kevin, that question.
Well, I'm going to ask a slightly modified version to Kevin, but.
So when you talk about product,
yeah.
I think most people will jump to the car on the track being the product. The product, and we both know this, is so much bigger than that. The product is the event, the entertainment experience that a fan will get, the digital and social experience that fans can get, and of course, the race itself. The first thing I would say is we're not trying to be Formula One, and I suspect Formula One aren't trying to be us. We have very different fan bases, and we're trying to create our own motorsports. I say they've been doing it for 75 years, much further down the line than we are. But when you talk about competitiveness, so as you go down to the last race of last season for us, which was London back in July, there were 7 drivers that entered that last race that could still win the championship. So we're a very close combat style of racing that's highly, highly competitive, arguably the most competitive motor racing in the world, which is actually quite different to where Formula One is because it's so established and the technology is so established. And you're looking for tiny, tiny, tiny gains in wind tunnels or investment. And therefore, you often get these generations of teams that win for periods before the next one catches up and kind of takes over. In our world, because we're in the very early phases of the technology, you really don't get that. Yeah. So all the way through to the end of the race, it is really anybody's chance to win the championship. So I think we are very different products. There are 8 billion motorsport fans in the world. I think 2 products can survive quite happily with 8 billion fans.
Well, one thing about F1, and we talked a little bit about this backstage, but F1 really is about dynasties, right? We're in the 10 years that you've been racing. I mentioned that it was Lewis Hamilton, Max Verstappen, and I think you said Sebastian Vettel in the last 10 years, but it is also about the technology behind the car companies, right? The dynasty isn't just the driver.
No, far from it, I would say. I think the dynasty is really with the manufacturer much more than the driver. The luxury that the big and the good manufacturers have is that they can choose the best drivers. So naturally, the best drivers ends up in the best cars. That's kind of the dynamic. But over the last 10 years, you've basically seen 2 manufacturers dominate the sport, and that's been Red Bull and Mercedes. These organizations just have a strength, no matter the regulation. If when there's a big change, they just come out on the other side, the best. They just work very, very well, and it's kind of gone back and forth a little bit, and it still is today. But yeah, I mean, they have been dominating, and I think the Formula One has evolved a lot. We've now got budget caps. In the past, manufacturers could spend unlimited, and of course that would give them an advantage over a smaller manufacturer. Today it's actually equalized, and small manufacturers are much closer to a team like mine, Haas F1 team. We almost operate at that budget cap. So in theory we have the same amount of resources as Red Bull or Mercedes. I think the transition phase is probably going to be long. These big teams, they have an advantage that they've built up over all those years of spending unlimited. They still have technologies and tools and systems that are still in place. Infrastructure in their factories that still today is giving them advantage. But over time, I think it will hopefully equalize.
Is parity in the sport something that you're looking for?
That's a big question, and I guess it's not parity on the racing track, because you want the teams to be able to find an edge and maintain an edge and then have periods of success, because if you don't have that, then I think you're not encouraging teams to come in and invest for the long term in the sport. So if you look at our teams, Porsche, current driver world champions, but we have McLaren, who are obviously in Formula One as well, and Andretti, who have had legacies in IndyCar and NASCAR. You want those racing teams to come in and feel like they can get an advantage and maintain an advantage. If the question is broader around equity in sport, then absolutely. I mean, we certainly have a point of view that motor racing should be inclusive, not exclusive.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be down to your background as to whether you can be successful in a car, get a seat in a car and drive in a car and be successful. So we do focus on bringing people from disadvantaged backgrounds into the sport. We're very focused on bringing more women into the sport. Interesting fact, of everybody who holds a racing license, you need to have an FIA license to race cars. 97% of the people that hold them are men, 3% women. So if you just do the maths without any of the other barriers that exist, the likelihood of getting a license and rattling your way through the system to end up in a racing car in Formula One or Formula E, the chances are very, very slim. So, for example, we have the first ever women's only test day happening in Valencia in November, as we try and accelerate a pathway for women to get more time in the actual car in order to make their way into the main championship. So we're very focused on equity, and we're very focused on this being an accessible sport for everybody. Yeah. But on the racetrack, it's a little bit different. And I think, you do and you expect to see those big teams that have invested over generations, like Red Bull, like Mercedes, like Porsche, like McLaren, you expect them to see them competing at the top all the time.
I want to switch it a little bit. Do you ever see a future where Formula E and F1 merge?
It's hard to see. I think it's good to have maybe competition between them, and I think there's, if you look into the future of the auto industry, and there's going to be electric cars. There's probably going to be still combustion engines. It's a big question mark. How is the industry going to look? There is a chance, I guess, that there's going to be more than just electric cars. There's going to be maybe, certainly hybrid engines. There's going to be maybe hydrogen engines, and I think there's probably room for two big motorsports in different technologies. Yeah,
and I think we touched on this earlier, though, but like Formula E and F1, maybe to a layperson, look like they might be similar, but it's driving two very different cars.
Yeah, and you only have to look at the fan base. Mm-hmm. So to truly understand whether they're perceived differently, you look at the fans. And by the way, I should say I'm a big F1 fan, but...
So you can be both. You don't have to pick.
Oh, God, 100. Well, I'm a big F1 fan. Kevin said earlier he'd driven a Formula E car in the simulator. If you love racing, you love racing. But Formula One's been around 75 years, and I grew up watching it with my dad, and therefore you find it's generational. So people come through watching it, they support a driver or a team because they've grown up supporting it. And the fan base tends to be a little bit older because it's been around for a lot longer, and I would argue a little more male. If you look at Formula E, we're only 10 years old. We have a fan base that isn't only interested in racing, they're interested in sustainability and how technology is affecting sustainability. So our fan base is actually gender split, 50-50 male-female, and half our fans are under the age of 40. So as I said earlier, 8 billion motorsport fans in the world. I don't think one has to lose in order for the other to succeed. And people know this, so I'm not saying anything that's not known, but of course Liberty Media owns Formula One. Liberty Global owns Formula E, so two organisations that are effectively cousins own the two different organisations. Invested in them for very different reasons, by the way, but no, they're focused on creating two very successful sports.
Which it seems like it is doable, in your opinion. Can you talk a little bit about the difference in the Formula E car, Kevin, since you've probably maybe driven both?
Yeah, well, I only drove the Formula E on a simulator. But these days they're
almost
very realistic.
The same.
Exactly. So I think the main thing as a driver is that you are doing all this energy management manually. So that's a whole skill set that you have to learn and you have to fine tune. And that's, I think, in Formula E, that's what makes it. That's probably the biggest factor of what makes a good driver in a Formula E car. In Formula One, it's all automatic. All the saving is done by engineers and systems, and so all we have to focus on is going as quick as possible, and then the car will just be restricted if the team is, tuning on the systems. But so I think it's two very, very different ways of driving. Neither of them is more difficult than the other. I think when I drove the Formula E simulator, I was blown away by how complex it was to drive this car. I'm used to just getting in and going as quick as possible.
And just like hitting the pedal and going all the way in.
And I think it's another element that is making it. It's something new in motorsport. It's not traditionally anything that's ever existed. I think this is a unique thing.
When you spend as much time as I do around world-class drivers, you realise that whatever you put them in, very quickly they find a way. And I was saying, if you put Kevin in a tractor, he'll find a way of making it go faster than anybody else will. Any motor vehicle, they're experts at driving. A little story from my history. So I worked at Honda when we had Formula One, and one of the drivers at the time was Takuma Sato. And we also had a powerboat racing series at the same time, and he happened to ask if he could have a go in one. And of course he got in it, and the first lap he was bouncing up and down. The second lap it was a bit smoother. By the third lap he probably could have competed in the World Championship. Just they find a way.
The skill set is so unique, and your body just knows what to do. We only have like 90 seconds left, but I want to ask, if you put an F1 driver in a Formula E car, who would just kill it? Like, who would just go the fastest?
Present company accepted.
Present company.
I meant him, not me, by the way. Well, you should answer.
I'm tempted to say you can't say Max, but if you want to say Max, you can say Max.
Well, I think Max is the benchmark in Formula One, but as I mentioned, I think the skill set is very, very different in Formula E. Having said that, as Jeff said, when you put drivers into new circumstances, they find a way, and a lot of if you look at the Formula E field of drivers, they all world class from the junior categories, and some of them have been in Formula One, some of them have at least been on that path all the way. So and then went into Formula E and been successful. So I do think yes, it's very different, but the same sort of basic skill and talent has to be there.
So he dodged that completely, didn't he?
Yeah, I need a name. I need a name. Pick a name.
Well, we talked about it. I think some of the younger guys that have grown up with esports, and I think they have a different way. They fundamentally are slightly different, and maybe some of the young guys. So maybe Norris, I think, would be a good guess.
Lando Norris. McLaren.
I'll tell you who I'd go for. Max is a generational talent, actually. So I think Max would be the pick for me. But I think, to Kevin's point, if you're motivated and interested in the tech, and you've grown up gaming, and therefore you're used to this multitasking, two-handed multitasking, I think someone like Yuki Tsunoda, because we're also a very close combat racing series, and if nothing else, Yuki is a close combat racing driver.
He loves to get around the track. I know we are out of time, but Kevin, I can't let you get off the stage without asking you what's next.
Well, I don't know what's next yet.
Okay.
Next year for me is still an unknown where I'm going to be. I'm out of contract with Haas. There's only one seat left in Formula One open for next year. So naturally, there's a few drivers still competing for that seat. We'll see where it ends up.
All right. Well, best of luck. Thank you both so much. This was a lot of fun. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.